Dear expert, welcome. In this webinar, you will learn how to evaluate Open Science in Horizon Europe proposals. You may be familiar with the open access mandate in Horizon 2020. Well, now you can forget all about it. Things are going to be different as Horizon Europe moves beyond open access to embrace open science. By open science, we mean an approach to the scientific process that supports the early and open sharing of results and extensive researcher collaboration, as well as the involvement in research of relevant society actors. Open science is important to the European Commission because it leads to better and more efficient research. It encourages interdisciplinarity and collaborative work. It enables reproducibility of research, thus increasing trust in science. Further, it enables extensive citizen participation in the entire research process. Open science should thus be considered carefully in the evaluation of proposals. There are two important elements for you to understand as an evaluator. Firstly, it is important to keep in mind the distinction made in Horizon Europe between mandatory and recommended open science practices and how each is evaluated. Mandatory open science practices are required by the Model Grant Agreement or the Call for Proposals. Meanwhile, recommended practices are used to incentivize the take-up of open science practices. They will be positively evaluated if sufficiently addressed, meaning that applicants explain how such practices are adapted to the nature of the project and how these practices help further its objectives. Secondly, you will evaluate open science under the excellence and the quality and efficiency of the implementation award criteria. This is an example of how things are different to Horizon 2020. It will no longer be evaluated under impact. Let us examine more closely the mandatory and the recommended practices. Look at this table and the 4 highlights on mandatory practices. You will see that in Horizon Europe, open access to publications and research data are mandatory practices, but there are exceptions for research data. Research output management is also a mandatory practice, and so are measures to ensure the reproducibility of research outputs. However, participating in open peer review or depositing preprints in the relevant servers are not mandatory practices. They are recommended practices. For everybody's convenience, these practices, both mandatory and recommended, are listed in the template for proposals. The recommended practices list is non-exhaustive and applicants may come up with more or other practices. The Horizon Europe Programme Guide offers more information. Let us now examine more closely how open science practices will be addressed by applicants in their proposals and how you will evaluate them. Let's look at what will be evaluated under the excellence criterion and what will be evaluated under the quality and efficiency of the implementation criterion. Look at the left-hand column. Under the methodology section of their proposals, applicants should describe how open science practices, mandatory and/or recommended as appropriate, are implemented as an integral part of the proposed methodology. Applicants should show how the choice of the practices and their implementation are adapted to the nature of the work and how they increase the chances of the project delivering on its objectives. Check that any information relevant to the specific area of the proposal is provided. Note that applicants who will generate or reuse data and/or research outputs other than publications should outline their plans for research output management, including data, as required in the proposal templates. You will evaluate that too. You can find more information on research data management in the Horizon Europe Programme Guide. Now look at the right-hand column. Applicants should list their expertise or track record in open science under the section explaining the capacity of the consortium in Part B of their proposal, and their relevant achievements, such as publications, software, and data, amongst others, in Part A of their proposal. Note that you will not evaluate the significance of publications on the basis of the journal impact factor of the venue where they are published, but on the basis of a qualitative assessment provided by the applicants for each publication. Let's look now more concretely how you will evaluate open science practices under the excellence criterion. Keep in mind that your evaluation concerns both mandatory and recommended open science practices. Starting with the mandatory open science practices, as the graph shows, the score will be higher if applicants provide concrete information on how they will comply with the required open science practices. If applicants do not provide concrete information, the score will be lowered. If applicants believe that open science practices do not apply to their project, they will need to justify this, and in that case, open science practices will not be taken into consideration in grading. For example, if a consortium mentions that they will not produce publications, open access to publications does not apply, and the proposal will not be evaluated on this. If a consortium will not produce research data, the proposal should not be evaluated on research data management. Moving on to the recommended open science practices, it should be kept in mind that they are used to incentivize open science, but not to penalize applicants. Thus, there will be no impact on the score if they are not addressed at all. Recommended open science practices should be taken up when appropriate for the purposes of a project. In such cases, and if they are sufficiently addressed, the score will be increased. This is the incentive for applicants to engage with open science practices beyond the mandatory ones. Let's illustrate these possibilities with examples of sufficiently addressed mandatory and recommended practices to show what you should be looking for in proposals. For mandatory practices, a proposal sufficiently addressing research output management would provide concrete information on all the elements presented in the list you see in the slides. Sufficiently addressing these issues would result in a higher score, while conversely, generic and non-specific information on these elements would result in a lower score. For recommended practices, a proposal states that the consortium intends to first share their work early and openly as preprints and through registered reports, and to deposit all relevant underlying materials and tools such as data and workflows. They provide all relevant specific information to trusted repositories. These are repositories that meet specific technical and organizational requirements to guarantee that the content will be accessible in the long term and reusable. Applicants also describe the timing of access, among others, and explain how these practices of early and open sharing of research are appropriate for their project and how they further its objectives. In this case, the score should be higher. Remember, the key to all of the above is that we want concrete information on mandatory open science practices and that recommended practices are incentivized through grading if sufficiently addressed. There are more resources to help you understand the process. We highly recommend that you read the first pages of the Open Science section in the Horizon Europe Programme Guide, which describes extensively the evaluation process for open science. The rest of the guide discusses primarily the recommended practices. It also provides information on how applicants should address open science practices in their proposals. You can read about the mandatory practices and what exactly is required in the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement and the Annotated Model Grant Agreement.
We now come to the end of this video. Thank you for your attention and for your valuable evaluation work.